A ruthless billionaire had dismissed 6 nurses in just 2 weeks. None could endure his sharp tongue, his impossible demands, or the cold wall he had built around himself. But then a young nurse walked into his room, calm, unshaken, and unafraid, to meet his fury head-on. She didn't know it yet, but she would be the one to thaw the ice around his heart. St. Aurelius Hospital wasn't like other places. Here, wealth replaced faith, and people came not for miracles, but for comfort. A clean bed, polished halls, the illusion of control. The private suite in Wing A1 looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical ward. Dark wood panels, polished marble, fresh flowers delivered every morning. The only reminder of illness was the man in the bed, radiating anger like an open wound. Ethan Blackwell, business tycoon, and once the face of power, had survived a car accident that dominated headlines. He hadn't lost his life, only broken. Bones and deep injuries across his back. Injuries he couldn't tend to himself, which infuriated him more than the pain itself. In 2 weeks, 6 nurses had left pale and shaken. One lasted an hour, another 2 days. They all said the same thing. He's impossible. That morning, sunlight broke weakly through the fogged windows as the door opened. Ava Morgan entered, young, steady, her uniform immaculate, her gaze unflinching. Ethan didn't bother to really look at her. His voice cut the air like a blade. "I don't need anyone. Leave." Calm silence followed. Ava placed her tray of supplies on the table, then spoke softly but firmly. "Can you treat the wounds on your back yourself?" Her question struck deeper than a raised voice could. For the first time, Ethan looked at her. She didn't stare at him like a billionaire, only like a patient in need of care. He scoffed. "Do you even know who I am?" Ava smiled faintly. "I know you're human, with a fractured spine, and if yesterday's stitches aren't cleaned, infection will do what that crash couldn't." The room tightened with tension. For once, Ethan had no immediate retort. He only stared, as if thrown off balance. Ava slipped on gloves and pulled a chair close. "I'll stay quiet if you want, but I'll do my work. Whether you like it or not, you need help." He didn't dismiss her, and for the first time, a nurse stayed. The next morning, she returned. And the morning after that. Ethan never said, "Stay," but never again ordered her to leave. They entered into a silent agreement. She would tend to him. He would endure her presence. Between wound dressings and vitals, the air was heavy with silence. His words were always edged with ice, hers always calm. They clashed without shouting. Neither yielded, yet beneath the stillness, something invisible began to shift, like cracks forming beneath frozen water. A week later, the storm arrived. Not from the weather, but from the heart of a nurse who had carried patients too long. Ethan, hunched at the edge of his bed, glared at his tablet screen as stock numbers scrolled. Ava entered quietly with fresh bandages. He didn't look up. His voice snapped. "Don't make it hurt like last time. I hate when the stitches tear. I pay for the best. Compared to them, you're just a trainee." This time, Ava's stillness broke. She raised her head and met his eyes, her voice steady. "But carrying steel, you can fire me right now. Call the manager, I'll walk out. But don't mistake kindness for something you can buy. You don't own decency." The words cut through the air sharper than his anger ever had. She wasn't speaking for money or pride, but for something deeper. The belief that healing wasn't just for the body. "I'm not here to rescue you," she added, her tone firm. "I'm here because caring is human. If you think that's weakness, then you know nothing about strength." The silence that followed was heavier than any outburst. Ethan lowered his gaze slightly. For once, he wasn't the victor in a battle of words. Not because he lost. but because she never played. Ava left at the end of her shift, her steps steady, her back straight. Ethan watched her go, not sure why. Maybe because her words lingered like smoke that refused to fade. Maybe because for the first time he noticed the exhaustion in her eyes wasn't from the job, but from him. The suite remained flawless, polished, and silent. Yet Ethan had never felt more alone. As the evening nurse reminded him of his medication, he only nodded quietly. Something inside him had begun to stir. Not a landslide, but the first faint shift of dust when sunlight filters through. He was still Ethan Blackwell. But after that day, he was no longer the same man he had been. Recognized. The golden light receded from the A1 suite like a silent tide, leaving behind a cold, gray quiet. No broken glass, no shouting. Ethan simply sat there motionless, eyes fixed on the white bandage around his arm as if it were a question. He didn't know how to answer. No one spoke to him for the rest of the evening, and for once he didn't ask anyone to leave. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't sure he was the one in control. Night fell. The soft overhead lights cast a warm glow against the window, reflecting back a tired face, his own, worn and unfamiliar. A breeze slipped through the window, crack from the hallway. The usual nighttime sounds played. Footsteps, automatic pumps, wheels rolling across tile, the quiet symphony of hospitals after dark. Then, from the room next door, the staff rest lounge. A voice not loud but clear, raw, a little shaky and painfully human. "Yes, Mom, I'm okay. Don't worry. I'm not falling apart." Ethan instinctively turned his head. That voice. Ava, he hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her words fell into him without warning, without permission. "This patient is driving me insane. I've never met someone so cold, so sharp." There was a quiet laugh, tired but without bitterness, like someone making peace with something that couldn't be changed. And then the line that made Ethan stop breathing. "But I think he's more lonely than he is cruel." Silence followed, a long one, and Ethan felt something, heavy settle in his chest. Lonely. The word echoed through him like sound in a hollow cave. It was the one word he'd buried deepest, the one he'd denied for years with work, with money, with penises full of nothing, with armor so thick no one could get close. Now, spoken by a nurse he barely knew, delivered like a fact. He looked around. The room again. Everything immaculate, everything expensive and utterly lifeless, just like him. Ethan couldn't remember the last time he'd heard a kind word that didn't come with an agenda. He pushed himself upright, bones groaning in protest, as if to remind him that physical pain had always been easier than emotional ones. His hand reached, behind him toward the wound on his back. He couldn't reach it, and for the first time he didn't feel anger. He felt helpless and hollow. On the glass window, his reflection merged with Ava's, each from their own rooms, two people not in the same space but sharing the same ache. And there, in the armor Ethan had spent a lifetime forging around his heart, a small, nearly invisible crack had finally formed. Some truths, when spoken softly, leave us more silent than any accusation ever could. If you also believe that sometimes the person who hurts us most is the one hurting the deepest, drop a like to keep hope alive for this journey of healing. And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss the moment when the first cracks begin to show in Ethan's armor. Last night, Ava didn't get much sleep. Not because of the IV pump clicking or the hallway light spilling into the break room, but because of her own voice, the voice she thought was private, echoing in her head like someone had recorded it and hit replay on a loop. She didn't know if Ethan had heard her, but the rawness of letting her truest thoughts slip, of not trying to be strong, not trying to please, left her feeling more exposed than she'd ever expected. The next morning, The sky was still overcast. A thin mist coated the windows, cold and uncertain. In that half-rain, half-fatigue atmosphere, Ava carried a small, fragile hope that maybe behind the ice, Ethan had heard her, had understood, even just a little. She didn't want gratitude. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She just hoped he'd stop pushing people away. Ethan was sitting on the hospital bed, gray patient scrubs on, eyes locked on a tablet but clearly not reading a word. His face was blank like a frozen lake. Ava walked in, tray of medical tools in hand. A female neurologist stepped in behind her to do rounds, polished professional, her eyes scanning the room with the practiced precision of someone silently assessing cooperation levels. Ava handed over the chart, stepped back like always. It should have been another quiet, routine morning. But then Ethan spoke without context, without prompt. His voice was flat, calm. Each word hit the air like ice dropped on concrete. I don't know what you use, shampoo, lotion, whatever, but the smell is unpleasant. One beat later, he added, I haven't been sleeping well. Could be the lights you leave on when changing my bandages. And just in case it hadn't cut deep enough, he turned to the doctor and said, I used to think good nurses knew how to be present without being seen, but maybe I've set my expectations too high. No one laughed. No one moved. But Ava didn't need an explanation. It wasn't just personal. It was a complete eraser of everything she'd given, patiently, quietly, without condition. No trace of last night, no emotion, not a flicker of recognition in his eyes, only the smooth, cold delivery of someone who's learned to hurt first, before anyone gets close enough to hurt him. When the doctor left, the silence that followed was the kind that made you hear your own heartbeat. Ava stood still, hands still wrapped around the edges of her tray. But inside, the hurt had already passed the point of silence. She spoke, her voice steady, but no longer soft. I'll be requesting a transfer today. Ethan didn't look up. Suit yourself. 2 words, but enough to collapse every ounce of faith she'd built up. Ava stepped out. The door clicked shut behind her, sharp and final, like the snapping of a fragile thread that had barely begun to form. Down the hall in the supply room, she braced her hands on a cold metal shelf and took a deep breath. But nothing could filter the sting rising in her throat. She used to believe she was strong enough not to be hurt, that if she gave enough kindness, it would find its way to the right person. But maybe she'd been wrong. In her mind, her mother's voice echoed, a voice she used to think was too blunt, too cynical. You don't have to break yourself trying to be good to everyone. Some people don't want to be saved. Ava closed her eyes. Her hands trembled, not from anger, but from exhaustion, from emptiness. Her kindness, like a candle burning, down to its last flicker, still glowed but barely, flickering, alone in a dark room. And Ethan Blackwell, the man she once believed could be healed, had just blown it out with a few meaningless words. Ava didn't come back. All night, Ethan tried to convince himself it meant nothing. A nurse switched shifts, a staff rotation, nothing worth dwelling on. He'd replaced hundreds of people in his company, erased names from payroll without blinking. And yet this morning he woke up with a weight across his chest, nameless, thick like dust that wouldn't brush off. The knock came at exactly 7:45. No soft, steady voice asking, "May I come in?" Just the hurried clatter of a medical, cart's wheels, and a different woman's voice, louder, more tired. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell. I'm Nurse Helen. I'll be covering your morning shift." No smile, no careful eye contact, no polite small talk, efficient, distant, sterile, like the room, like Ethan. Helen snapped on gloves, reviewed his chart. Her hands moved quickly, practiced, but each motion felt mechanical, like she was wiping down a surface, not tending to a person. Ethan lay still, eyes open, but not focused. In the fog of his mind, a thought surfaced, old, intrusive. "I need her to come back." He shook his head. "No, not now." Helen removed the dressing from his shoulder. It didn't hurt. It wasn't done poorly. But something was missing. Not technique, not precision, presence. Ava didn't just change dressings. She noticed. She listened. She had that look, the one that made people sit straighter. Not because they were told to, but because they felt seen. She never left a scent. But she left behind something more lasting. The sense that he wasn't fighting. This alone. As Helen rewrapped the wound, Ethan stayed silent, but his chest tightened. Not from pain, from the growing shape of the space Ava used to fill. A shape that didn't resemble any absence he'd ever known. She wasn't here anymore. No more soft voice steady with resolve. No more hands that worked gently, but eyes that seemed to see past skin and into the fractures underneath. No more timely silences. No more words that reached him without hurting. Just a physical presence in the room. A person, not her. Actions, not meaning. Motion, not connection. Helen left. The door closed behind her. The room on floor A1 returned to its default state. Clean, bright, lifeless. Ethan stared at the ceiling. The thought returned, uninvited. She's gone. His chest rose and felt like he'd been running, though he hadn't moved at all. Then, like some dormant survival instinct kicking in, he pushed himself up and reached for the phone, dialed reception, and for the first time his voice carried no command, but something far more unfamiliar need. "This is Blackwell. I want to see Nurse Ava Morgan." A pause on the other end. "I'm sorry, Miss Morgan requested a shift transfer. She's no longer assigned to VIP care." Ethan closed his eyes. One beat. Two, then exhaled hard, like trying to push the last of his pride out through his lungs. He opened his eyes, his voice steadied, not sharp, but real. "I want her back. I'm requesting her personally. Tell management. Tell them the patient needs her." For the first time, Ethan Blackwell said the word "need" not for convenience, not for productivity, but from the hollow ache in his chest. Not everyone could change him, but she was the first who made him realize if he let her slip away for good. This time, there would be no one else who could take her place. If the moment Ethan whispered, "I need her," made your chest tighten too, hit like two, keep the faith alive, that even the coldest hearts can learn how to feel. Subscribe to the channel to follow the story's biggest turning point, where the heart finally finds its voice. After hanging up, Ethan sat still for a long time. The phone was still in his hand, as if putting it down might erase the words he had just spoken to the world. "I need her to come back." No one responded right away, and in that silence, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he couldn't summon someone's presence with power alone. That afternoon, the medical supervisor stepped into his room and laid a transfer request form in front of him. Under reason, there were standard check boxes: expertise, good rapport, patient morale. Ethan didn't check any of them. Instead, he picked up a pen and wrote by hand at the bottom, "Because she's the only one who never treated me like a failed investment." The supervisor looked up. She didn't say anything, but something in her expression softened. That evening, Ethan wrote another note. Brief, plain, without embellishment. West Garden, 5 p.m. No Blackwell, just Ethan. p.m., West Garden. Ava read the note at 2:03 p.m. Folded it. Didn't cry. Didn't smile. But for the first time, seeing his name without the weight of power, she felt just a little lighter. She wasn't sure she'd go, but sometimes the heart moves before reason has. A say. The West Garden. The only place in the hospital that still felt real. The breeze gentle, the last of the red maple leaves drifting quietly, the lavender bushes dry, but their scents still lingered like the remnants of something beautiful that had existed, even if only briefly. Ethan stood there, not leaning on. A wall, not in a wheelchair, not Blackwell, just Ethan, A man waiting for an answer to the part of himself he'd buried for too long. When Ava appeared, they stood only a few steps apart, but it felt like a whole lifetime in between. Neither rushed, neither spoke quickly. Then Ethan spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was real. "You once said I could fire you." He looked up, his gaze unguarded, exposed, stripped of armor. "But now I'm just asking you not to leave." The wind passed through. Ava's eyes didn't shift, but her heart did. Quiet notes struck deep in her chest, subtle but unmistakable. Ethan took one step closer, not to claim space, but to close the distance that had always been made of loneliness. He continued, each word, peeling back another frozen layer. "I used to think if no one got close, no one could betray me. I thought coldness was survival. But then you came, not asking, not promising, just doing what was right. Quietly, clearly." His voice dipped lower, and I started to believe that maybe not everyone wants to hurt me. Ava inhaled softly, then asked, "So, what is it you really want from me, Ethan?" "No more, mister. No more distance." He lifted his head, this time without hesitation. "I want you to stay, not because it's your duty, but because you choose to. I'm afraid, well, if you walk away again, I won't find anything real left inside me." Ava stepped forward. Closer. So close. No touch yet. But her eyes said, more than any words could, "I used to think I couldn't trust you, but today I see a man trying to hold on to what's right, not with power, but with honest vulnerability." She smiled barely. "If you take one step forward, I'll stay. But if you step back, I'll be gone for good." Ethan drew a breath. Then he stepped, just one step. But the first true step of a man finally becoming someone he'd never dared to be. He didn't pull her close, didn't grab her hand. He simply reached out, open, unforced. Ava looked at his hand. Moment passed. Then she placed. She had given something back to him, something he thought was long gone, trust. In a place where blossoms had withered, a quiet seed began to grow. No grand speeches, no vows, just a love that was chosen, simple and real. A week later, the bruises on Ethan's shoulder were mending, but the scars inside him were only beginning to heal. Each morning, Ava entered room A1, glancing at the chart at the foot of his bed. But this morning felt different. Ethan wasn't lying there like a man waiting for the world to serve him. He lifted his head, his eyes steady, and said softly, "Good morning." Just 3 words. Yet for Ava, they carried more weight than any expensive gift ever could. That afternoon, on the hospital's ground floor, a small, forgotten recreation room had been transformed. A white cloth over a long table, a few pastries, glasses of juice, soft lighting, nothing extravagant, just sincere. At the center stood a simple card, a thank you gathering for every nurse, technician, and staff member who had cared for Ethan, Blackwell. At first, no one believed it. "He really invited us? What's the trick?" But curiosity won, and one by one they came. Night shift workers, new recruits, even department heads. The air was tense, almost holding its breath. The head of the table stood Ethan, alone. No assistant, no microphone, just him. Ava stayed at the far end, notebook still in hand, her eyes fixed on him. Not guarded, just searching, waiting. Ethan spoke without ceremony. "I used to believe money was enough, that if I paid people on time, I owed no gratitude. I've said things I regret. I've pushed people away when I was hurting." The room was silent. No one had ever imagined Ethan Blackwell admitting he was wrong. He drew in a breath. But I was wrong, and I learned that because of someone in this room. His eyes turned toward Ava. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes shimmered, not from sentimentality, but from the quiet truth that she wasn't alone in what she had believed. "Thank you for not giving up on me," Ethan continued. "For showing me kindness isn't a transaction. It's a choice." No one clapped. No one laughed. But in that moment, something shifted. If Ethan Blackwell could stand there and say those words, then maybe anyone could change. As the crowd dispersed, Ava walked past him. She didn't stop, only whispered, "The first thank you belongs to you, for doing the hardest thing of all." He turned, gave a small nod. Their eyes met, and in that silence, nothing needed to be explained. 3. Weeks later, St. Aurelius Hospital was back to its routine. Ethan's name faded from daily talk, and Ava quietly resigned. No drama, no tears. She moved to a small town by the river, where mornings began with the sound of a bread cart and evenings ended with golden sunsets over the water. Her new home was a small one-story with a porch and a frangipani tree. She learned to care for plants. She learned that silence didn't have to mean loneliness. It could mean healing. One Sunday, after rain cleared, Ava stepped onto her porch with a folded blanket in her hands. A car pulled up at the gate. No honking, no rush, just a gentle stop, a black sedan. The door opened. Ethan stepped out. No roses, no expensive suit, no guards. Just him in a worn jacket, mud on his shoes, and a brown paper bag in his hand. Edges creased from being held too long. Ava didn't move, didn't smile. She leaned on the railing, waiting. Ethan raised his voice gently. "I learned how to make soup for someone with a cold." Then, with the faintest smile, "You once took care of me. Today, I came to ask if I can take care of you, if ever you're tired." Ava's eyes softened, but her lips stayed silent. Ethan stepped closer, still outside the gate. He held the bag through the wooden bars. "I'm not here to start over. I'm here to start for the first time, as myself." She studied him, then slowly came down the steps. Taking the bag, she opened it. Inside was soup, still warm, carefully sealed. Not from a restaurant, not from a chef, just a bowl made with his own hands. "Soup doesn't prove much," she said quietly, "but bringing it here, that's a start." Ethan laughed softly, the first laugh that felt real. "I can learn to cook, to clean, to fix things. But the one lesson I only want to learn with you is how to stay beside someone without making them feel small." Ava didn't answer. She simply opened the gate wider and walked inside, leaving the door open behind her. Ethan paused, then followed. No dramatic music, no rehearsed confession, just an open door, a warm pot of soup, and two people finally ready to meet without masks. If you believe love can outlast pride, fear, and even time itself, please like this video and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that reach the quietest corners of the heart.